It's time for the show about the people and the places of the Carolinas with the occasional visitors. In addition to hosting the award-winning syndicated TV show Life in the Carolinas, Carl White writes a weekly syndicated column and now hosts this weekly show, the Life in the Carolinas podcast. Now you can hear the story about the stories. And now, here's your host, Carl White.
Ellen Lee, welcome to Life in the Carolinas.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
You know, for those who don't know or hadn't watched the show long, including yourself, Life in the Carolinas is all about the people and the places of the Carolinas and the occasional visitors. And you would be a visitor. We met, a few years ago, or was it a year or so ago?
No, it was just May.
May.
This past May.
Wow, seems like it's a year ago. But so we met in May because you were in North Carolina for a leaded stained glass master workshop with Michael Reevely, who's known all over the country.
Correct.
And he's here in North Carolina, in Wilkes County. And you came out for one of his classes, and you learned something, but I think you kind of fell in like with the area a bit, right?
I did. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We-
So here I am again.
Yeah, there you go. Well, we love it here too, and we love it when people visit. And above all, we love hearing stories and sharing those stories with people. So we've had a chance to get to know each other since we met in May, and now you're back again for another class with Michael Reevely at Wabi-Sabi Workshops to learn how to do yet another thing with leaded stained glass.
Yep.
How long have you been an artist?
Oh, a lot of years. I don't know. It's hard for me to look back and pinpoint it exactly. I've always liked art. I've always liked color, and I've always liked glass. So, you combine all those together. But a friend of mine taught me, actually, probably in the 80s or
to
90s,
paint or?
to cut glass
okay.
to some beginning, stained glass. So I've worked on it a little bit here and there through the years.
So growing up, was it part of your family? I mean, did you?
No, it was not.
So okay.
No, I grew up in the country in South Mississippi, and no, we were not art oriented. We were more work oriented.
Work oriented.
Garden oriented, and school, and yeah.
Well, there's a lot of that in the Carolinas.
I mean, I did take some art classes in school.
Sure.
But,
okay, all right.
Yeah.
So there was a little bit there.
A touch.
A little bit there. But it's all wrapped up in memories of hard work and calluses on your hands.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything wrong with that. I think that might be something right.
Oh, I think so too. I mean, it wasn't bad. It's just it was just the way life was. I mean, we had a lot of fun too. Kids growing up in the country in those days, you could get really creative with what you had to do.
That's right. I remember my grandfather, because we grew up in the country as well, and my grandfather on my mother's side, I never will forget, he had a mule and horse, but he would use that. He was a real big man, so he would cut lumber, and he would work their garden and that type of thing. Had a big family, so they needed to grow a lot of food. And I never will forget watching him in the garden, not like people think today, it was pretty big, but with this mule hooked up and him having an argument because it had to pull the plow. And he would say, "Geed" and "ha," one to go one way and one to go the other way.
Right.
And I don't know who was the most stubborn, but I remember that there was some heated expressions between him and the mule. But I remember that. And then I think back to that time, which is a wonderful time. I love visiting my grandparents. And I remember breakfast. There were just huge breakfasts. There was always lots of, because there was chickens, so there were lots of eggs and, we had eggs and bacon or biscuits. Oh, biscuits. Biscuits and gravy, that type. It was similar in Mississippi.
Oh, yeah. My dad was one of 9 children.
Okay.
And so his mother made pans of biscuit.
Right.
Every morning.
And they were delicious,
So-
right?
Oh, of course. And they were all perfectly sized.
Yeah. Did
It
she
was
make
amazing.
buttermilk and butter?
Oh, she did it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
I remember that too. My
yeah.
grandmother, my mother, she didn't do that. I don't remember her ever. She was a great cook.
And we did that growing up. When I
Okay.
was a kid, we had cows. We milked them.
Right.
We made butter.
And
all
you made
that.
butter
Yeah.
and churned the butter. Isn't it
Yeah.
funny? Isn't it funny because that way of living, we think of it as something in the past, but now, Ellen, that way of eating off the land, eating fresh, eating real butter, not processed. You're processing
Plastic,
it,
yeah.
right? In other words, here's the cow you milk, here's the butter you churn, or the milk you churn to make butter, and then processing that. And the richness of that,
Yeah.
that was the normal. Now that's a specialty, and it's
Right.
quite expensive now. And I can imagine why, because it takes so much work.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Do you try to eat as much that way now as you can, or you just eat like it's hard, isn't it?
Not really.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah. I know. I get my eggs from a little farmer, and I've met the chickens. I met the goat because she makes goat cheese, and it's really good.
Goat cheese is
And
wonderful.
so there's something special about that. I've
Yeah.
gotten out of my car when I go pick up my weekly supply, and I know the goats. I know all the chickens.
They have names.
Well, I just say hi. They come up, they're just real friendly. The goat's especially friendly. She's really friendly, and I don't know. Maybe it's getting older, but I think it's a better way for us to eat. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's probably healthier.
So you're here in the Carolinas to learn more about stained glass work and take that work to a different level for you. But I want to talk a little bit also about your not only life now, but what brought you to where your life is, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. So when you and I first met, we talked about your life as a rehab nurse, right? And you had done that for a very long
Time. About 23 years.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. I think there's a multitude of reasons that I want us to share this story in the Carolinas, and then with everybody that sees it around the country. Is I believe that people with disabilities have challenges that are so profoundly unique that unless you've had that, you have no idea. Some of us, we've had things that happen that we have it momentarily. We have heart attacks, we have cancer, we have things. But then to have either be born with a disability or have a terrible accident and your life completely change, and it's not, you deal with it, you're able to rehab to a degree, but you're still going to you're changed for the rest of your life. I guess we could say that about cancer and heart and kidney problems as well, but at least there are meds and there's a hope, of getting back. So you chose probably one of what I would imagine to be the most challenging and emotional fields of medicine. Talk about that.
When I was in nursing school, the School of Nursing was next door to, or actually it was the buildings adjoined to the rehab center, the local rehab center. And there was an opportunity for me to work there during the summer between my, junior and senior year of nursing school. And so I took that opportunity, and I fell in love with it. It was very small then. It's grown a lot since then, but I just fell in love with it. And even though I was a little scared of my shadow country girl who was going back home after she finished school, I found myself not going back home after school. And so I stayed. And I worked, after I finally got my license. Back then it took a while. You had to take your test and then wait about a month to get your results. Kids now think 2 hours is a long time. But anyway, I digress. And so I stayed there. And I just fell in love with it. I worked predominantly, at that time it was two floors. One floor was spinal cord injury and brain injury patients. The other was strokes and orthopedic patients. And I fell in love with spinal injury patients, and I think part of that had to do with the fact that I had difficulty communicating with people who could not talk back to me. I still, when I'm dealing with people who can't communicate to me, I still have difficulty. I always have.
Right.
I learned to work around that, but it took a while. But anyway, spinal injuries, most of them were young. They had these traumatic injuries that just changed their whole life. And in that time, too, they stayed anywhere from 6 to 8 to 12 months in rehab. And so you kind of got to know them, pretty well.
Sure.
And I just loved it. We had discussions about their life, about their injury, about their families, about their hopes and dreams, and all of that.
So all of the patients that you were working with and taking care of, they were all people that were in that situation because of an injury. They weren't born with the disability. This was caused because of an injury.
The majority. There were a few occasionally in the latter years that might have been born with like spina bifida and had some issues that needed to be dealt with. But the majority of the ones that were there, it was because of a traumatic injury. Yeah.
We're here in the holiday season now, Ellen, and if you look back over the years, and I've talked to a lot of healthcare providers, and it seems like it goes two ways during the holidays. For some people, it's rough, and for other people, it's more joyful. But in the right environments, in the hospital, and it can be very celebratory during the Christmas season. So what memories do you have during that time of the year that you remember that were particularly hope-filled for some of your patients? Anything stand out?
They would work really, really hard to be able to go home.
Okay.
And one of the things that we would do is allow patients to go home. You could do that then. You can't do it now. But insurance, it's a lot different now. But we would allow them to go home for a weekend pass or for a holiday and then come back and complete their rehab. So, it gave them opportunity to figure out what they still needed to work really hard on. But they would work really hard to try to accomplish things so that they could go home, and their families would come in and learn what they needed to learn to deal with them being home for a few days. So it was nice to see that excitement and that, short-term goal setting so that, you could see the eagerness and the happiness in them, and they'd be able to go home and enjoy a holiday with their family.
So these would have been people who that you're describing now would be people that had a home, they had a family, they had some type of a support system that they really wanted to spend time with because they knew it was going to be pleasant, right?
Right.
Okay.
They knew it would be a challenge because things would be so different. But they still, they wanted to go back home and they wanted to see what life was all about, now.
And at a time that's filled with celebration.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
So that lets us know that the holiday season at Christmas time has enough power to it and enough positive energy that could energize someone who's in rehab to what do I got to do? I got to walk another thing around the block or what?
Right.
I don't know what the test was.
Well, and particularly if they had been there for 3, 4, or 5 months, then it's like, I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
So,
Nice. All right.
Yeah.
I was just looking for that Christmas joy magic there.
It was there. But then on the flip side of that, there were also those who did not have that opportunity and did not have that kind of family support. And that's where knowing those people and developing that relationship with the staff there was helpful to them. And then it was also helpful to the people who work there because you go a little above and beyond during that time of year with people that are in need.
Because it sounds like, from what you're describing, is you literally become their family at that time.
You kind of do.
Or that support system that a family would traditionally give, when that's not there.
That's true.
Then you were that.
And then there were also those who would, we learned quickly, they would come back to be admitted during that time.
Because it wasn't
Because it was better to be there for some people.
Sure.
So there was the upside and the downside, but then you had to look at what you could do for those who needed you.
Sure, but so those people who did that, whether they had a disability or not, we all have a little bit of that, right? So we all have moments.
We do.
But we have friends that's the way they live, and you're like, I wish they were happier, but their life just isn't. That's just not what they were dealt. So there they are. So
they do what they can do to make the most of it.
Sure.
So
and that's a good thing, right? As far as progress.
Oh yeah.
Isn't the attitude? I know there are physical healing that has to happen with your nerves, your muscles, all of that. But your thoughts, your mental power has a lot to do with that too, doesn't it?
It does, and that takes time. That's a process. That doesn't happen just in a couple of weeks. None of it does. So it takes time. It takes the emotional, mental, part of it. I think you have to live through some of it to get there.
I think that's interesting you say that. So the physical side, the emotional, mental, they all go hand in hand.
They do.
And if you don't deal with all of them, and mental is one that is taboo for, even now, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think years ago, maybe it was even more distant for some. How do we deal with that? What do we do even now? I know you're not practicing now, but you're practicing in life. I don't know that a nurse is never not always a nurse. Like a teacher is always a teacher, I think.
That's true. It's just kind of in you.
It's who you are. You're nurturing and you, unless you were one of the bad nurses. Then there might be bad stuff left, but that's not your case. But movies make us think about those things.
I know.
But what do we do about that? How do we talk about it or have a positive influence in our communities and society about that duplicitous makeup of who we are? And we do have these emotional and mental things that it's not only okay, but it's imperative that we talk about and deal with.
Well, and that's I think the most important thing. You have to talk about it. You have to face it. You have to deal with it. But, I've never had a disability myself, but I've, worked with a lot of people who have. And, again, my thing was spinal cord injured patients. And one of the things I would always tell them whenever we would have some discussions about, emotion and adjustment and that kind of thing was, don't ever forget you are the same person. You may have this injury, but you are the same person that you've always been. You just have to do things differently. You just have to adapt. But your mind is the same. Your heart is the same. You just do things a little differently. You just,
That's huge, Ellen, because it's for the patient. So I'm listening to you say that, and I'm like, of course, that's it. It's like anyone walking down the street and something happens, and then you're no longer walking. You're disabled because of an injury that happened.
And that's easy to say. Yeah, it's a lot harder to live through and to live with.
But the patient has to do that, right? So you encourage that.
They have to. They have to believe that. They have to realize that. And that just takes time. So
there's the other side of that I think we should chat about, and that is society. So I have friends that use chairs, and they're brilliant. They were brilliant. They just had an accident, and they can't.
They're still brilliant.
Nothing has changed except the transportation mode. One guy, he's an athlete. My gosh, he can do more than I can even think about doing. And, he has two prosthetic lower leg, it's from his knee down. Yeah. And he bounces, they bounce up and down. It's the most interesting thing. And he can run and he can do all these things really well and competes as an athlete. And we were talking one day, and he said, I asked him, I said, so why, what's been your biggest challenge? And he said, my biggest challenge first was in between my ears.
Exactly.
And then my next biggest challenge was learning how to forgive the idiots around me who judged me and thought I was a cripple. And that was his words, right?
Yeah.
And I says, what do you mean? And he said, well, everybody, thought I couldn't do anything. Nobody, and they treated me not only as if I couldn't physically do it, but that somehow I become an idiot and I couldn't think or process or do anything. And he says that's what pushed me to do. He said he could run faster now than he could before. So he pushed it. I know and he says that's not the case with everybody, but he said it made him so mad that people thought for some reason he was mentally or cognitively, logically, he had somehow lost his ability to be brilliant.
Yeah.
And that really rattled his cage. So that pushed him. So I'm sure you had to see things like that.
Yeah, I think that's the case for a lot of people. They're so determined to prove themselves that they exceed expectations.
So that's a good thing. But it's not a good thing why they, the thing of society not.
Right.
I don't know. What.
But I don't know
causes
how
that?
you get society to understand that.
I don't know. How did you do it?
Until they see what people can do. And so the more people there are out there that face, handicaps, disabilities, mobility impairments, whatever word you choose to use to call it, the more people can see their abilities, the better. And the more educated I think people can become.
So it's merely a process of that's not the right word either. My gosh, it's so complicated. But it's the person that has to rehab having the best attitude and basically endurance that they can possibly have to push through.
Right.
And then hopefully they've got a great family support, but even then not everybody understands. Or they have none. It's no support. But to still have to move forward. I guess it's just that thing of you have to move forward and do the absolute best you can.
Yeah, and that's a real challenge for people.
Yeah.
And some people, succeed better at it than others.
Sure.
But their environment and their family support and their social support have a lot to do.
How do you talk with your friends who are, you live in Mississippi and area Pearl and that quaint little area there, a lot of good people out there. So you married someone who was in a chair. You met, if I understand, remember the story correct, you actually met in rehab.
We did.
And
we did.
I don't know how many nurses marry their patients, but
he was never my patient.
Oh, he never was?
He was never my patient.
Okay.
His roommate was, but he wasn't.
Wait a minute. So his roommate, so they were, okay. So when you were going to visit your patient, which was his roommate, then you all saw each other.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Locked eyes one day, and years later things,
Later.
Yeah.
Because during that time, I think he had eyes on somebody else.
Right.
So, but it all,
yeah,
as things do, they all work out.
They do, Ellen.
They do. So about 3 years later, after we walked all around each other, even lived in the same apartment complex, never visited each other, for a year. Then about another year later, we ended up marrying.
So let me ask, okay, so I don't know that I knew that part of the story. So you and he, so you formally become aware of him when you were taking care of his roommate in the hospital, right? Yeah. He was there for rehab as well.
He was there for a short time.
Now, but you just said something that the two of you lived in the same complex.
We did.
So did he live there before the accident? For the reason he was there for rehab, or did he move in after? Okay,
when I was working there that summer as a student,
right,
he had just completed his bachelor's degree at college.
Right.
And he had gotten a job, and he was going to be moving to Jackson to live in an apartment alone.
Okay.
And so he came back to the rehab center for probably a couple of weeks, I don't know, just to work on some activities of daily living skills because he was going to be living alone. So he wanted to kind of freshen up on some of that so he could manage on his own. But and so that's when we actually met. And so at the end of that summer, I went back to school, he went back to work, and then for about a year, you know, we would see each other when he would come to the outpatient clinic. We'd kind of bump into each other in the hallway. So we'd speak, say, hello, how are you, blah, blah, you know.
Right.
Well, then after about a year, my roommate moved because she got married, and so I had to move into a different apartment. Well, when I moved, just so happens I moved into an apartment across the parking lot from his apartment building. There
And
were
you
different,
didn't know that?
different buildings. No, had no idea.
You
No idea.
promise.
I promise. Had no idea.
I mean, I don't
until I
care.
saw him in the parking lot.
Right. and then, but there was you'd already moved in.
I had already
had your
moved
keys.
in. Yes.
You weren't just looking
Signed
at the
the
place.
lease, everything.
You were already there. Okay.
And so-
and you come out one day,
And there he is.
and there he is.
And so for a year, I lived in that apartment until I again moved. But during that time, I never went to his apartment. He never came to mine. We would just occasionally see each other in the parking lot. And then we'd occasionally still see each other at the rehab in the hall, say hello, that kind of thing. Well, about a year after, then I moved.
Right.
And a little while later, I was working 311, and I was taking care of a friend of his, and he and some other friends happened to be visiting him that night. And so I was his friend's nurse. And so I went in, and there he was visiting. And so we chatted for a few minutes, and, he jokingly said, well, you never came to visit me, and you moved. I said, yeah, I did. You never came to visit me either.
Right.
And so that was the beginning.
Oh, the sparks of possibilities.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. So that's how it happened. Okay. All right.
true.
Okay.
So I did not marry my patient.
No, I got that
It was
part.
very close to that.
Yeah,
But
well, I thought you were tracking him and moving
we
in,
just
but
walked
I see
all
how
over
that-
each other for a while. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't it
So he
funny
was
how-
already injured. He was injured. That was in 1981. He was injured in 75.
Okay.
So he had been injured for a few years.
And
at
this
that
was
time.
the beginning of your professional
It
career,
was
right?
It was.
Okay. All right. So that's how it all got started.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to see if things were different than Mississippi and North Carolina. I don't think they're different at all. Okay.
No.
So that's okay. So that's how the two of you officially met. I thought it was very interesting in your career path and then also his career path and how they did, at least from a messaging and the people who benefited from what both of you would do with your careers. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, he had great determination to help people who were in the same situation he was in, or worse. The job that he got was with the Department of Rehab Services. And he actually started the independent living program in the state of Mississippi. And so he did a lot of work with the legislators. He went to D.C. several times. He was involved in, activities to get the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. He was very active, very determined, to help those that he recognized were in need. So.
That's interesting because you're working with people on a day-to-day basis on getting to that place, right? Of being able to, that next step of going out and actually living life as I don't know, do you even say as normal as possible, but getting back to life in your new way, in the best way possible, right? Yeah. And he was someone who had done that.
He had.
So you witnessed it.
And he had tremendous family support.
Okay.
To be able to do that. He,
All right.
matter of fact, I was, over Thanksgiving, I was there with the family some, and we talked a little bit about him and his very first van. His older sister pushed him between buildings and classes for him to be able to do his work at USM.
Oh, yeah.
And at that time, they had great difficulty transporting him, I think. So she has very vivid memories of him getting that first van and being able to drive for that first time. And she said, I don't think he would have cared what it was, what it looked like,
Right.
how old it was. He was ready to go.
Right.
So it just was that time for
Right.
him, and it meant that much.
Wow,
So-
that's interesting. Let me go back. So did you say his sister
His sister
went to
yes.
school with him?
His sister, she's about a year older than him.
Right.
He went after his injury. He went back to University of Southern Mississippi to get
Okay.
his bachelor's degree in business.
Right.
She went with him, took notes for him in class, and pushed him in a manual wheelchair from one class to another. She helped transport him. She helped get him there.
That's a big campus.
So it is a big campus. But he needed that help, and his family was super supportive to make sure that he got what he needed.
Wow, that's
And,
a lot of love there. That's
is.
incredible. So
It is.
he and his sister had to be extremely close or
Yeah.
resentful. I don't know. I'm hoping close.
They were close. There's a lot of love there.
Yeah. Wow. That's
Yeah.
incredible. I mean, just think about that. I mean, how many people would do that? Yeah, it'd be hard enough to pay somebody to do that and be there every day,
Yeah.
right? And have
Yeah.
that commitment. But then to have a family member, a sibling.
that.
So that literally, she wasn't getting her degree. He was getting his degree, and she was his support person, right?
Right.
Who went everywhere he went.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
I wasn't there, but that
No,
is
no.
my understanding of
Yeah,
that.
correct.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
in any event, she was there part of the time. That's still a great
Right,
commitment.
yeah.
And it shows his determination to
Mm-hmm.
actually make this happen. Wow. Okay, so that's kind of that background, and then one day, I guess the two of you got married.
One day
Yeah.
we did.
Yeah. Was it? I mean, you can see the room. Was it Christmas by any chance?
It was actually in March.
March? Well, it was after Christmas. Yeah, and before.
It was in March. The what do you call that stuff that's purple? Grows on a vine.
Hyacinths?
No.
No, they're not growing vine.
I'll think of it in a minute.
Lilacs? Tim says
No,
lilacs. No. It's a smells real pretty.
Yes,
right?
it does, and the bees love it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was blooming. 'Cause
It'll come. Well,
Yeah.
when did he propose? If you got married in
you
March,
know, I don't know exactly.
it must have been Christmas.
I don't remember.
I'm just looking for a
exactly.
tie into Christmas season.
I know.
So,
It was several
that's good.
months ahead of that.
Okay, all right. Did you all have some special Christmas times together?
We did. We had lots
Gosh.
of good. And, we were both very family oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And so his family kind of traditionally would say, okay, everybody go where you want to go for Thanksgiving. We don't care, but everybody's going to be here for Christmas.
Okay, right.
And I want to be at both places for Thanksgiving and for Christmas. And
Right.
so I always tried to sort of figure a way to split that time between the two families. But it was always a family time. We rarely had a Christmas just the two of us, just
Right.
because we were so family oriented, and our families were in two different directions, and so we tried to to divide that time, but
So
then
did you-
have a little time just for the two of us too. So we usually would travel some, not long distances, a couple of hours. But we would travel over the holidays to spend time with family. Some of those travels early on, I can remember freezing on the way,
Right.
and he was always the driver. He never would let me drive.
So he had already gotten his van by that time.
Oh, gracious, yes.
Right.
He had 2 or 3 by that time, because
Right.
he also occasionally, in his early years, liked to have a wreck, but we won't go there.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so we would usually drive and just spend time with family. So
Nice.
it was good. So it always got to the point that Christmas Eve was his family time. That was when we all got together, and we were always there. So
There's something strong, powerful about that, isn't there? There's a strength that comes from that family energy,
There is.
or whatever your tradition is. Some people gather with friends, and they've done so for years. That becomes their family. Wow, that's special. So over the years, you've had a lot of Christmases together, and thinking about this time of the year now, and your background, his background, and what it means. What should we be mindful of? What should we be thinking about? How should we express ourselves in whatever supportive way we can for people with disabilities? What gift should we always be mindful of that during this time of the year we can do this little extra something to provide encouragement, support, or whatever we can do?
Well, I think first of all, to just respect that person as a person, to not assume that they can't or don't want to, or I don't know, whatever. But to just respect that individual as an individual and as a person, and do what you can do to look beyond what you see with your eyes, to get to know somebody and to understand them. And to know where they're coming from, because that makes a huge difference. And when you do that, then I think you can recognize, you can identify some needs and some ways to help. So
basically, if we think about everybody as a person first, and we value that person, or all persons, for who they are, and whether you have a disability or not.
Right.
Right? Because there are good people and not so good people, disabled and not disabled.
that is very, very true.
So
it's very true.
So it kind of like, well,
Yeah.
if you're on the naughty list just forever because you're just naughty, well, you may not get as much love as everybody else. But in general, I think, wow, what a gift. I always, this time of the year, I always think about I don't like to think about the materialistic things as much, because that's easy. That's just super easy.
Yeah.
Buy a few gifts, you do that, that's done. But that's not really giving of ourselves.
Right.
That's just exchanging money for some stuff that probably won't mean very much, very long for anybody. But the emotional energy and support and love that we can share in some way, that might be the biggest gift of all.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, spending time with somebody, just listening to somebody, just finding out if there's some little something, a need that you can feel.
Right.
But the only way to do that is to spend time with somebody,
get to know
talk
someone.
to somebody,
Right.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that spending time with and talking, I think that's the gift delivered.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if that's something we don't have in great abundance.
True.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, wow, Christmas is great. And then you've got your life would go on to do all sorts of great things with you and your husband. And he started which is one of the things that brought us together in our conversations, was a business that helps people with disabilities from a mobility standpoint. And I thought the story was so interesting because of where he came from and how he approached it. Where he came from, more from his physical journey and then intellectual journey that he went on to equip him to really make a difference, not only for people with disabilities in general, but to put a program together and be part of that in Mississippi, be part of the American Disabilities Act program. I mean, to be part of that journey that has to give you a great sense of pride.
It does. It does. He accomplished so many things that, it's hard for people who are 100% able-bodied
Sure.
to do some of those things sometimes. And for him to be able to do that, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
So he started this company, started a company of band conversions, and talk about that.
He started the company with a friend of his that I believe, if I remember the story correctly, he actually met when he was at University of Southern Mississippi. Daryl was also a quadriplegic, and so they became good friends, and they worked together for some of the years that he worked for the Department of Rehab Services, and then they both retired from there, and so they decided to start this business. They understood and they knew the needs of people, to be able to travel, to be able to go where they need to go. There's so many people out there that need to go to the doctor's office, and they have to hire somebody to take them, or they have to, back when they started it, there was no Uber or anything of this sort. And there weren't the travel transport companies didn't exist the way they do now either. So it was very difficult for people then to actually be able to find some transportation in an accessible vehicle.
Right. And when we say then, we're not talking about that long ago.
It was 30 years ago.
So 30 years
30 years ago.
Which is not a long period. That's in our life. That's
really
our lifetime.
Yeah.
And so it's not been that long. So if we take the American Disabilities Act, so he was involved with that process, right?
Prior to starting this business.
Prior to starting that business. So even that was not that long ago.
No,
right?
It was not, right.
But we've had people with disabilities and these needs for
forever.
Right. So up until then, and I'm sure there are detractors on all sides of everything. However, the reality is, the truth is, if someone is walking about and and something happens, they have a traumatic injury, then the only thing changed was their body. But everything changed because no one really understood how to be supportive, or for the services to be made available, or why is it important that we don't park in the handicap spot, or why is it important that we don't park in the handicap spot that has two bays with a picture that kind of lets you know that there's going to be a van parked here and they're going to unload here. So if you park here, it's going to hit your car.
Exactly.
But since it just keeps the van that unloads from the side from parking there. I guess there could be some people.
There are people that will park beside the van that's already parked there in spite of.
Well, there are those people, but I don't think there are many van driving people. They're going to pull up and just keep having their door open and try.
No, because they can't get out. They're stuck. Right. So no, they would not do that.
They're stuck. But it's not been that. Human condition changes very slowly. Yeah. And the idea that we've been doing this for 100 years is not. That's not accurate. It hadn't been that long. Right. So that's where our understanding as a society. So there's this idea that when something generationally changes, so the parents are here, they have children, and if those children are born into a time period that the experiences they had, the kids no longer have. For example, no phones to phones. No, and going now from having house phones to everybody having cell phones, not even having a landline, right? Right. And then searching for history records. You do all that online. You don't go to the library and pick out the books. You can.
And card catalog. What's that?
Oh yeah, sure. That would Dewey Decimal what?
Exactly.
So that becomes complicated, right? So we really are just now, I suppose, entering a time of where, because we're talking 30, 40 years, so we're entering a time of where people were adults, they had children, and those children now are growing up to where they can effectuate change. So we're just really now getting into generations of where things might be more normal to treat people normally if they have a disability.
And more available, too. You know, when my husband got his first van, I think it was Michigan he had to go to get it, Minnesota or Michigan, I don't remember
and
exactly.
he lived in Mississippi at that time?
And he lived in Mississippi, so they had to drive a long distance to get that van and bring it back home.
Right.
The other thing is vans then were the full-size van. It wasn't a minivan.
Right.
And so it didn't have a ramp. It had actually a lift that folded out from inside the van and then lowered to the ground, and you roll on the lift, and it raises you up, and then you get in the van. Now, what most people use is a van with a ramp that folds out or either slides out from underneath the floor, one or the other. And then there's also now SUVs that can be modified, which back 30 years ago, that certainly was not even thought about. So, you know, things change, times change. So
people now
and they
have
get better.
so somebody with disabilities now have many more options than they would have had before.
They do.
And from what the research that I've done just from my side, just because I was curious, it's gotten more user friendly for independence.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there are remotes and buttons in various places that are easy to reach, and it's a lot easier.
So your husband did this for several years, and now you are the head of that company as well. What are some of those stories that you hear from people who have gotten their first van, or maybe people that got vans from the business before you're in charge, and now they're getting their second or third van? What type of stories are most common that you hear that people share on how this makes their life a little bit better?
Things that they're happy because it makes them be able to go to school. Like, if you're college age and you can drive, you don't want your parents driving you around all the time. You want to be able to go on your own. Right. That's where the SUV kind of comes in too, because you really don't want to be, 18, 19 years old and driving a minivan. And so it makes people happy to be able to have more choices, to be able to have more independence, to be able to go where you want to go and when you want to go. It's freedom.
Right. So the evolution from when your husband went to college is his sister had to go. Somebody had to go with him to do all that. Now
you can do it all on your own.
You could have you could drive yourself, and you could have a chair that you could either do it by arm power, or you push a button and it takes you where you want to go.
Right.
So the mobility solutions have certainly dramatically changed.
Yes, they have tremendously.
Has that helped? Has that helped from a standpoint of disability? I don't want to say disability rights, but just the general response from the community on how people look at or think about someone with disabilities. Has some of that, I don't know, what is it, prejudice or just ignorance of not knowing that this is a person? Yes, they're using a chair, but they're really smart.
But look at what they're able to do.
They do everything everybody else can do. They just had an accident, and now they can't use their legs or arms, but they can do all these other things, and their brain is just as good as, or maybe better than it was before.
Yeah, I think that it's a combination of things. Some people it is ignorance, but not ignorance in a negative, derogatory way, just ignorance of the situation, ignorance of...
It's not malicious.
No.
In other words, people are, I think in the past, people were kind of mean. There were people that would... see someone with disabilities and they would say derogatory things, and they
want to push you to the side.
That's right. And I think that was more mean-spirited because I don't know where it came from, but I'm sure somebody would tell us, but I don't know that we need that. It just wasn't good. So now the not knowing is not as bad as it was.
True.
But it's still
That's
important
true.
to be aware.
Well, and I think the visibility of people. Okay. When you see somebody drive up and park in the parking lot and they're alone, and they get out of the vehicle and they're in a wheelchair that they're operating with a joystick,
right.
And you see, wait a minute, that person just drove themselves here and got out of that vehicle, just like I would get out of my car.
Right.
So I think the visibility of people in the community helps to increase or decrease rather that level of ignorance that once was there. So the more people can get out and do things and function and be in the community, the better.
What does it look like for people with disabilities now, with mobility solutions that are available, and just the general attitude of people in America? What is the future hope that you're looking at moving forward?
That anybody who needs to be able to go for whatever reason will have that ability, whether it's through their own personal vehicle, whether it's through a service that provides that, however that means may be there, for them to be able to do that. There are still a lot of people that are basically trapped in their home or in an institution because they have no way to get out. They have no way to transport their chair and go where they want to go. And reality is, in a lot of situations, we're not getting smaller as people. We are getting larger, and so we require larger chairs, and they're heavier, and they have all these attachments and electronics and batteries and everything on them that make them a lot heavier. So that makes it even more difficult sometimes. It'd be nice if everybody that had an injury, that had a disability, never had to go for any length of time in that situation, of not being able to go where they need or want to go. So hopefully one day that'll be the case. But for now, the challenges are being able to afford those vehicles, being able to, to look at what limited resources there are out there for people.
Right.
So my personal goal is to be able to help with that process. So.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas, Ellen.
Merry Christmas.
You can have your cookies now.
I can? Okay.
Thanks for listening to the Life in the Carolinas podcast. If you enjoyed your time with us, please visit the show's website at lifeinthecarolinas.com. Join our mailing list, and we'll keep you updated every week on what we have coming up and other interesting things around the Carolinas. We value you as a podcast subscriber. We'll see you next week. And remember what Carl says, it's never a bad time for a good story.